Good afternoon. Welcome to Home Headquarters. My name is Amanda Pascal. I'm one of the housing counsellors here at Home Headquarters, and I'm joined today by Andrew Eastham, an attorney from HHQ Legal Aid. We're just going to talk a little bit about foreclosure and what you can expect. At this point, there's been, up until now, there's been some slowdown and some changes in some of the programs and legal aspects. So we're just going to go over a few things. So the first thing that I want to encourage you to do if you are struggling with making your housing payment, sit down, review your budget very carefully and eliminate, cut down on any of your non-essential expenses, and wherever possible, if you can possibly make your payments, make whatever other adjustments in your household spending that can be made, and keep making those payments. If you aren't going to be able to make your payments, then you should contact your lender, your servicer immediately to discuss the options. Options are going to be different depending on when you may have fallen behind on your payments, whether that was pre-COVID, which I believe is March 1st. If you were delinquent prior to March 1st, you'll have one set of options. If you fell behind after March 1st due to COVID-related issues, then you may have another set of options. So it's really important that you call your servicer, your mortgage company, and discuss what those options are. But basically, it'll come down to either putting off some of your payments till later, or if your hardship has resolved, modifying the mortgage would be in order. But there are several different options depending on what sort of mortgage and who your mortgage servicer is. So make the call and make sure you do that budget review. Very, very important. Get rid of anything that's not essential so you can prioritize the house and put all your resources into keeping the house at this point. Andrew's going to talk a little bit about the legal aspects and court and so on, and what you can expect if you are served a summons and complaint.
Hello, so again, my name is Andrew Eastham. I'm an attorney with HHQ Legal Aid. We assist clients who are homeowners facing foreclosure. We provide them with counsel and advice for any of the legal aspects of facing a foreclosure. For clients where there are difficult issues that need to be litigated, we can step in and represent you. For the majority of the past few months, most foreclosure proceedings have been stayed and adjourned. In the eyes of New York State and the governor's office, foreclosures were not considered an essential matter. So Governor Cuomo did not place that additional burden on the courts to try to figure out a way to perform foreclosure proceedings in addition to everything else. So if you are someone who's been facing foreclosure or has fallen behind on your mortgage, or as of February or March you were in the middle of foreclosure proceedings and you haven't heard anything since then, for the most part not much has been happening. However, the latest executive order from the governor has lifted most of those stays, and foreclosures are going to begin proceeding beginning this month. The first thing I should note is the most recent executive order has stayed any and all foreclosure auctions for bank foreclosures until at least October. So for those of you who were worried about a potential auction that was happening this month or next month, most likely it has been adjourned because all foreclosure auctions were canceled as of March of this year and adjourned to a future date. So for those of you that haven't heard anything, if you're worried that the sheriffs are going to show up at this time, today or tomorrow or any time, that's not going to happen until October. So I just wanted to lift that burden off of you. The second thing I wanted to stress would be to watch your mail, however, because like I said, foreclosures are going to be starting up again. The latest administrative order from the courts has encouraged all courts to schedule every single homeowner facing foreclosure for an initial settlement conference. even before the COVID-19 pandemic, each and every homeowner in New York State was entitled to what's known as a foreclosure settlement conference. So that's a period of time where once you as the homeowner have been sued for foreclosure, everything else with the court case is put on pause, and you are scheduled for a conference in court with the judge and an attorney representing the bank. Now at this settlement conference, the sole purpose is to ascertain whether or not you and the bank can come up with a negotiated settlement that can avoid foreclosure. The judge is just there to ensure that you and the bank are in communication with each other and negotiating a potential settlement. He or she is not there to enforce an agreement or force you to sign an agreement or force the bank to sign an agreement. Settlement conferences are incredibly useful for our clients who have trouble getting a hold of the bank, have not heard anything from the bank, aren't sure what to do, aren't sure who they need to contact. Before the pandemic, it gave you a face and a name and a telephone number that you could call, because like I said, the attorney is there in court and they are there to provide all of that information for you. Now, because foreclosures are still considered non-essential in the sense that they aren't, Governor Cuomo doesn't consider foreclosures to be as urgent as criminal matters or family law matters, obviously. However, the stay has been lifted and the courts have been encouraged to do the settlement conference by web conference, if at all possible. Most of my clients that have been receiving these letters for their settlement conferences are being encouraged by the court to contact the judge's chambers and provide them with an email address so that either a Skype for Business or a Microsoft Teams invite can be sent out. If you have received one of these letters, I would highly encourage you to call the court and provide them with an email address. If you are unable to get to a computer that has good internet access, camera and microphone setup, there's the option that you can be provided with a telephone number to call and conference in as well. I've had that happen several times. Foreclosures are something that you always want to be involved with. You always want to remain in contact. It can be very stressful, but it's always better to be aware and informed as to what's going on as opposed to trying to ignore it. Because of everything that's been going on, the courts have been facing an incredible backlog with these foreclosures. Most of the settlement conferences I've seen scheduled were actually initially scheduled for March and April. So if you are a new foreclosure, most likely you won't be seeing that scheduling note right away. But the courts are trying to squeeze more conferences in per day. So eventually you will see something. The courts have also encouraged all parties to utilize electronic filing if at all possible. So obviously, you know, we as attorneys in New York State, we are expected to have the ability to do electronic filing. You as homeowners are not. So if you are someone who, like I said before, you don't have a computer, you don't have good web access, you don't have a scanner, or quite frankly, you don't want to go through the process of electronic filing, you don't have to. You can reach out to the clerk's office. Every county is operating a little bit differently, but they will be able to tell you in terms of how you can file things by paper. There is a form that you would fill out and send to both the court and the attorney for the bank, notifying them that you will not be participating in electronic filing, and that will essentially force them to continue to send you everything by mail. Once in settlement conference, you know, we can go back and talk more about the different forbearances and modification options. But like I said, it's during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of our clients are trying to go after essentially the same mortgage foreclosure temporary relief that was available before the pandemic. a lot of the guidelines have been expanded during the pandemic. Chief among them is, it was actually passed into law, so it's not an executive order, but it's actually New York State banking law, that the banks have been heavily encouraged to offer forbearances up to and including 12 months. Most of you might have received letters at this point from the bank offering you a 6-month temporary forbearance. For the most part, we're seeing that from the banks. They're offering 6-month forbearances. Then at the end of that, if you need to extend it for a further 6 months, you go through that with the bank. At the end of the forbearance, you will be negotiating with the bank for some sort of either modification or repayment plan. I don't know if we wanted to go into detail about that.
Yes, I think you have to be ready to work with the banks and services. It is really important that you do your homework as far as the numbers are concerned. For some of these programs, you're only going to get one shot, so you have to make sure that the hardship is resolved and you will be able to resume making regular mortgage payments. Ultimately some of the modifications will alter some terms. Maybe the interest rate lowers. They'll look at other ways to get you to an affordable mortgage payment, but you have to be prepared to resume making the payment and to stay on track, which means that all of the other budget issues have to be resolved. All those adjustments have to be made. Maybe you have a new normal. Maybe your total household income hasn't recovered to pre-COVID levels, and you're just going to have to redo the spending plan completely. But don't go applying for a modification before you're ready, because if you fall behind again, you won't be able to apply for it. So the forbearance programs may be the first stop, and a forbearance program will push the payments to a later date, but the payments aren't going to go away. They're not going to be forgiven. You're going to have to take care of those arrears and any payments that have been missed at a future date. So the first step is really to be serious about the spending plan. I'm always talking about the numbers. You may or may not have to send in paperwork to support your hardship. That's where calling the bank, the credit union, the servicer is super important, because they're going to ask you a series of questions to determine what program you're eligible for, and and get you into that program. So you've got to be ready. You've got to have a good idea about your numbers, and you have to stay in touch with the with your point of contact. Make those phone calls. Keep notes. Keep a log. Keep copies of everything. But you've got to make the phone call.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And there's at the beginning of this pandemic, unfortunately, there was a lot of information that spread faster than the correct information, just because so much was changing so fast. But there was a lot of confusion over what happened to homeowners who were accepting those forbearance plans, because as was stated, it's not that the payments are forgiven, but the payments that would have been due and owing during the time period that you are in forbearance are not counted as late payments. So it's not counted as a late payment that would lead potentially to a foreclosure. But a lot of the misinformation had to do with, well, what happened at the end of that forbearance. You just spent 6 months in forbearance, now you owe essentially 6 months of payments. And certainly they weren't counted as late for the past 6 months, but are they going to be counted as late payments now? The banks initially were not helpful in clearing this up, but they've all been essentially told that they need to engage with the homeowners in order to find some sort of negotiated settlement. some sort of affordable repayment plan, an affordable modification, some sort of payment relief to try to pay back those arrears in a way that's affordable to the client. Now that obviously comes with the assumption that at the end of that forbearance period, your income has recovered to the point where you can afford a monthly payment. And now I'll kind of branch off a bit and talk about two different scenarios. One scenario is at the end of the forbearance, your income has taken a hit, certainly, but you still can afford some sort of monthly payment. You might not be able to afford your old payment. Let's say your old payment was $1,000. You might not be able to afford that anymore, but you can afford a $500 payment. Well, if the bank is able to work out a modification agreement that fits their criteria for a modification and is affordable to you at that $500, they can work that out with you. Obviously, you would need to apply. You would need to apply for that modification and provide the financial documents that they need. Most of the time, that has to do with pay stubs, bank statements over the past few months, a hardship letter, which is it's not meant to be an incredibly long document. Hardship letters can just be very succinct and to the point. COVID-19 happened. I lost my job. I'm back working again, but I'm only working half time. I only make this much. I can no longer afford the pre-modification mortgage payment. Unfortunately, even before the pandemic, most of the banks and their mortgage servicers were not well equipped to handle a high volume of calls and homeowner interactions. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, that has only gotten worse. So you, as a homeowner, will need to be essentially you will need to become your own home office for all of these financial documents. You'll need to be responsible and organized and on top of things, because there's never a guarantee that the servicer will be. It's not uncommon for homeowners to have to send in the same document, whether it be a bank statement, pay stubs, Social Security, benefits letter, multiple times before the servicer will finally admit that they've received it and it's been added to your file and your application is now in underwriting. It's very frustrating, but just know that the end result hopefully will be a good thing in terms of you're able to settle out the arrearage and enter into a new modification in order to pay back your defaulted mortgage. I've had many clients where it's very frustrating to them, but just know that the backstop is always going to be that settlement conference in front of the judge. If you appear in front of the judge, like I said, likely not going to be in court, but if you show up with copies of everything you sent the bank, email, read receipts where you've sent it to, applications at wellsfargo.com, as a made-up example, and you have that to show the judge, and it's your full application, and the attorney states they haven't received it, the judge is more likely going to believe you, and he's going to adjourn the settlement conference out another month or two to essentially give Wells Fargo or any other bank prod them into rechecking their email and looking at your application and reviewing it. Whereas if you don't show up at settlement conference, don't engage with the bank, don't keep copies of everything you sent in, don't have that proof, the judge, might still believe you, but might not have any reason to keep your case in settlement conference, and he might allow the bank to proceed with the foreclosure.
And then remember, as you're working with the bank, there is only so much they can do. They cannot reduce your escrow numbers. So for those of you who have a payment that includes the principal and the interest, your property taxes and your homeowner's insurance, the bank can modify and work with the principal and interest numbers, that amount that you actually owe the bank, but the escrow amounts for property taxes and insurance are pretty fixed, and they can't, those bills are what they are. So the things that you can do on that end to influence your escrow amounts would be to look at the homeowner's insurance and see if there's any way to reduce that policy cost. Are you overinsured? Is there a more competitive policy that you could get a better price? And you can make sure that you have all of your exemptions and for your property taxes. Are you overassessed? Are your property taxes too high based on the actual value of the house? You can grieve the amount of property taxes. It's an exercise, but it can be done. Or you can just make sure that you have your star credit, that you're enrolled for your star credit or your star exemption, that you have senior credit if you're over 65, that you have veterans exemptions if you're a combat disabled veteran, for instance. So the bank can work to a certain point to reduce the payment to a more affordable level. The industry standards right now are 31% of your gross income as a maximum mortgage payment, housing payment, and that will include your taxes and insurance. So, that can be a place to start as you're looking at your budget and spending plan. Where is the money going in the household? You don't want to be spending any more than 31% on housing. It starts to become unsustainable, so that's what the bank is aiming to do when they modify the mortgage, is get you down to that 31%. Property taxes up here are a big deal. They account for 30 or 35% of your total housing payment. So it's just something that you have to factor in to the budget and make sure that all of it is affordable. But be organized, expect roadblocks, expect that you will have to send in information multiple times. As Andrew mentioned, it is not unusual. It's something that we have to deal with as well. It's not personal. The systems that the services are working with are flawed. They don't have enough help. There's a lot of turnover, and there's probably a big backlog on their end. So call times, wait times for calls are much longer these days. You might have to be on hold for a long time. If there's any way you can establish an email connection and have email conversations with your point of contact at the mortgage company, I would really encourage you to do that. It's a very good way of keeping records, but sitting on the phone on hold for half an hour or longer can be a massive waste of time as well. So, but you just have to document all of that stuff. Have a notebook dedicated to all of the work that you might have to do. The hardship packets and applications are pretty available online. You can also email us at home headquarters, info@homehq.org, and we can send you out any of the paperwork that you need to get your applications started with the banks. And provided your income has stabilized to a point where your household expenses, including the mortgage and your other debt, is affordable, then you've got a good chance of getting a good resolution. Anything to add?
Yes, I would say at this stage, actually bouncing off of that, I was just thinking, I honestly think there are some bank loan servicers and even law firms that during this pandemic, I don't think they were equipped to handle, and I don't think they ever got down to a work from home solution. Because there are some scenarios, there are some files I have where I have not heard anything from anyone since March. So that there is going to be an incredible backlog out there. That being said, if you are in a position to reach out to the bank, start settling something, certainly if you haven't entered into a forbearance agreement and you need to, contact the bank as soon as possible. But beyond that, if, as far as you know, you have not been sued yet, look at your mortgage statement. On that should have all of the contact us information for whichever bank or loan servicer you're dealing with. If you have been sued, you should have received a large packet of legal documents that it should be titled a summons and complaint. In that will be contact information for the law firm assisting the bank. Once you're sued, I always recommend reaching out to the law firm. They usually do have a paralegal or a group of paralegals that focus on actually receiving that information to pass along to the bank. And I've actually found that they're actually sometimes better to deal with, just because they're here in New York State, they're not in some other state. They're focused on your case because the bank is their client and they're representing the bank. So they have all of your information, and they're the ones that are responsible to reporting everything to the judge. So if you email something to the attorney representing the bank, if you email them an application for a modification, and you have that email read receipt to bring to the settlement conference, you show that to the judge. The attorney who's there most likely will also confirm that as well. And in the judge's eyes, both you and the bank are cooperating with each other, you're working with each other, there's no reason to allow the foreclosure to proceed. I should also note quickly, just because we're getting to the end of our presentation here, even if before the pandemic your case was in settlement conference and has been released, all the courts in New York have been encouraged to essentially schedule everyone for a post-pandemic settlement conference, essentially COVID-specific settlement conference, to kind of assess everyone's current scenario, taking into consideration COVID-19. We are interpreting that as meaning even if your case was released from settlement conference, you should get at least one more settlement conference. That's not quite a guarantee, so it's always a good idea to stay in touch with the attorney representing your bank, but just know that that's the case. However, even if your case is in a scenario where it's after settlement conference, and you're waiting for those last two motions that the bank needs to make in order to be authorized to proceed to an auction, you still can negotiate with the bank. And especially considering no auctions are going to be taking place until October, you still have plenty of time. The banks will be more than happy to look at any updated financials if it means they don't have to proceed with the foreclosure.
So check your budgets, rework your spending plans, start setting aside money. You might not be paying your mortgage now. If you can pay the mortgage, pay the mortgage. If you're unable to pay the mortgage, set aside as much money as you can in place of that mortgage payment and rework the budget and everything. If you have questions about foreclosure, my name's Amanda Pascal. I'm the housing counselor here, the foreclosure prevention counselor here at home headquarters. Call me 315-474-1939. My email is amandap@homehq.org. Pretty easy to find. For legal legal aid,
Yep, Hiscox Legal Aid. If you have been sued for foreclosure, you can reach out to our intake line, and that's area code 315-422-8191. Just explain to them that you've been sued for foreclosure, and they'll take it from there.
And we want to thank you very much for joining us again. We will see you next month for another Lunch and Learn. So if you've got any great ideas that you want to hear about, let us know. And have a wonderful day, and stay in touch.
Thank you.